Welcome to State of Tech, Synchron's innovation podcast. Synchron is a leading global digital transformation consulting firm focused on financial services and big technology organizations. Our State of Tech podcast hosts subject matter experts and business leaders as they explore emerging technologies, industry insights, innovation trends, and more. Let's dive into today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Synchron's State of Tech podcast series. I'm Ryan Cox, Synchron's co-head of artificial intelligence, and today, David Sewell, Synchron's CTO, and I will be discussing Agentic AI and its implications. Most people will be familiar with Gen AI by now, but Agentic AI takes things a step further. So we'll explore a little bit more about what that means to be agentic, how this autonomy shapes interactions, and just really the impact this technology has on the various aspects of life. David and I are going to unpack both the promising opportunities as well as the challenges that come along with AI systems that are designed to act with this degree of autonomy. So Dave, to start us off, can you explain a little bit what's meant by Agentic AI and why this concept is getting so much attention?
Agentic AI is the next wave of development that's really coming through the Gen AI explosion we've seen recently. And a lot of people are interested in how that's going to change the way we use the Gen AI and the large language models that power the Gen AI technology. Most people are familiar with the chatbot, so ChatGPT and those sorts of technologies. And that's effectively a single agent where you're having a conversation with an AI that's been given some instructions on how to behave. So you tell it it's a system that's designed to respond to questions. Something like that. And then when you talk about agentic, we're really talking about multiple agents. So multiple AI instances that have been given a slightly different set of instructions. You can instruct one to be a software developer, a technical writer, an architect with simple prompts. They then have a conversation amongst themselves. You ask them to solve a problem. They communicate amongst themselves. That conversation is then orchestrated to try and solve a specific problem. And that results in a more sophisticated solution or a more advanced thought process or chain of reasoning that will get you to a solution.
I think for our audience as well, just that orchestration, that end-to-end workflow is a step up from just calling a large language model itself, or even some of the traditional AI that can only handle and is limited to predefined tasks. So it seems like a pretty big step forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to change the way we implement some of the solutions we've been working on with traditional AI and the recent generation of language models and how they're implemented. There's some great examples for the types of solutions we can work on. Things like automatically solving software development problems, giving a number of agents the task of either writing software or testing software or documenting software, and then asking it to create a system. And they automatically then communicate the requests. As an example, we've built a system where we can ask it to write a small software system. The orchestration process then asks the software developer to write some code, which then passes it on to a testing agent, which can then test that code. And once those tests are passed, it can pass it on to the technical writer. But the interesting bit is if the tests fail in any way, the tester can pass the request back to the software development agent, which then redevelops the software to fix any of the bugs that were caught by the tester. So you can see it can create these kind of feedback loops within the agentic network that's being orchestrated.
Yeah, I guess each agent has their own personality. It's almost like when you go to workshops and you're told you got to put on your red cap to represent one way of thinking or your black cap to represent a different type. So is that something you're thinking about in terms of how these agents can approach problems?
Absolutely. They could compete with each other almost to solve problems. So you could have multiple agents with different roles to try and solve a problem in a different way, and then an agent to review the results and determine which one might be the best solution. There's lots of ways this technology could be used, and we're still learning how that could be used. I think the real problems we may face when we start to deploy some of these things are, how do we control the conversations they're having? What sort of challenges are we going to have to manage when we've got this new environment of multiple agents all talking to each other? What have you seen in terms of challenges that we would expect for these sorts of systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a challenge perspective, as you said, we are really just learning, so it's early days. I think like anything else with AI, the big topic at the moment is all about explainability. So in some of these systems where the AI is just iterating, making its own decisions and continuing on, we need to really make sure that we understand why the AI is making the decision and providing the right pause and stopping points that bring that control back to the human. Because I think ultimately, as humans, we're accountable for what happens. So we need to really make sure that we continue that human in the loop, or in some cases, human on the loop, to continue to monitor and understand what's happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the control we put in place at the moment is always making sure the human's in the loop. But with the agents, I guess you're starting to give them a bit more freedom to communicate and create chains of events or chain of thought, chain of reasoning. And I think that's where we're still learning how we're going to put appropriate controls in place with these systems. I don't know where we're going to end up with the development of these agents. A set of controls are going to be needed, but we're still driving at a really fast pace for innovation. Where do you think that innovation versus control or risk management is heading? How do you think we're going to balance this?
It really just goes back to a couple points. I think number one is really that human AI collaboration. So human in the loop piece. AI needs to handle this complex analysis, but people need to make the final decision and they need to understand the inputs that were used to make these decisions so that we avoid things like hallucinations. We know where the sources are and how they were obtained. And we also make sure that we have that insight into why the decision was made by that agent to do what it did. And then the second point, I think, is around continuing that transparency and explainability. So really ensuring that these decision-making processes not just are explainable to a person looking at the process, but even to the point of, from an audit perspective, to regulators, compliance officers, that kind of stuff will foster and build trust in these systems so that stakeholders, users really understand that there is fairness and we have the right handle on risk. What's your take in terms of that innovation balance?
It's got to be said, the innovation in this space is exploding. There are new models coming out all the time. There's new innovations. There's new frameworks being developed that enable this kind of agentic system. So we don't want to prevent that innovation. That innovation has been spectacular over the last few months, years. So we don't really want to slow it down. But we do need to put some controls around it to make sure that there is a certain amount of managing the risk. One of the areas we need to start to think about more carefully is regulations and what sort of regulations we might need and how we're going to control the companies that are developing and innovating. What type of regulations do we need? What do you think about the regulations that have been developed so far? Do you think we need more? Do you think we need less?
I think regulation is a tough one, right? Because AI is evolving so quickly. It's almost hard for the regulators to keep pace. The EU, for example, is leading with that Comprehensive AI Act that categorizes AI applications by risk levels. And it has very stringent regulations on those high risk sectors, which includes finance. And then in contrast, the US has taken a little bit of a different approach. They've adopted a more sector-specific approach where agencies like the SEC, the Federal Reserve, they're providing guidelines that relate to AI's use in financial services. So it's a very fragmented landscape. As we're developing and working with our clients on these, it becomes a little bit of a challenge. But I think we do have some common regulatory themes, focusing on transparency, accountability, fairness. So regulators are really emphasizing that AI systems must have that understanding and be free from bias. They must have that explainability and auditability.
The data that is used to train this stuff is obviously one of the topics that's talked about a lot at the moment. There are issues around what data is being used to train them. Is it something that can be reused? Is it something they've got the intellectual property rights to use? And it's very difficult to look inside these AI technologies to understand what data they were trained on. Is there a need to put some more intellectual property regulations around some of these things? How do we manage that? How do we manage the complexity of what's inside the AI that we really don't understand what's going on inside these things?
Yeah, I'll serve it back to you just because I know you've done quite a bit with model risk frameworks. I can say in the AI world, we do a lot with model validation frameworks where we use certain ways of quantifying how good the model is, making sure that you don't have drift, meaning that as your data sets evolve and making sure that as your models get upgraded, that you still have a really solid output from these models. But from your experience in working in a number of trading systems, how does that compare and contrast to the standard model frameworks that risk management departments use today?
I think you're right. That quite a lot of the model framework and the controls you must put around these things are very similar to the frameworks, particularly in financial services that people already use. They have to understand the outcomes and the expected outcomes and understand where the data sources were from. That's the challenge that a lot of people are facing. And maybe one of the answers is to look more at the open source market and understand where we build agentic AI systems using open source models where we know where they are, we know how they were trained, and maybe get the larger organizations that are building the big large language models to be more open about their training data. That potentially will help solve some of the problems. The real challenge is regulators understanding the technology. We have a very fast-moving, rapid innovation cycle going on here. We know the regulators are always struggling to keep pace with it. Is there anything you think could be done to help the regulators keep pace?
More AI, maybe we empower regulators with AI. And I'm half joking. I think there is probably some degree that it could help, but I think even just some standard controls like regulatory sandboxes is a great example. It's regulators can be agnostic to the technology and still provide a safe place for companies and other organizations to test their software and to make sure it works.
Yeah, agentic AI just adds complexity to that problem because you've suddenly got a control problem around an individual AI agent. You've now got multiple agents. And one of the implementations of these sorts of agents could be multiple AIs in the back end. So it may not be the same AI in each agent. There may be multiple agents and multiple AIs or models being used. So then you're multiplying the challenge and the problem that you've got.
That is a great point. And that kind of touches a little bit of the future of where this technology is going. I think a lot of the future will be shaped by this balance between innovation and regulatory oversight. So what are your hopes of the future of agentic AI? Is it multiple agents, multiple models, or where does it evolve from here?
I think it's really exciting. We're talking about some of the negative challenges possibly in regulatory issues, but it's actually a very exciting technology that's being developed. The future is going to look very much like multiple agents with multiple models all talking to each other. We can look at fine-tuning the models for specific tasks with specific agents. So you'll end up with these specialized agents that could be offered as services possibly. And then you'll end up with this network of these multiple agent models and services interconnected and orchestrated. You can see very sophisticated platforms being developed. We've got a lot of history of building AI-based systems where we have a sequential set of processes where it gathers data, processes the data, gives it to an AI and asks the AI to summarize it or extract information from it, and then passes it on to another sequential process. With agents, we're now looking more at a system where you're asking a single simple question and the AI determines what needs to be done. It asks other agents to get involved in a conversation to help it with problems. So you ask a software developer agent to build something. It'll go off and ask a data specialist agent to build a data schema or something like that, and then feed it back into the process. So you're going to end up with a network of agents solving these problems that we used to do with very sequential programming. But again, there may be challenges with that in that these agents are maybe a little bit non-deterministic. You're letting some agents go off and have a conversation with each other to try and solve a problem without necessarily the same deterministic sequential process that we're used to working with. So we're all going to have to learn how to work in this world of multiple agents, all having specialisms, and then really trying to understand what's going on inside their network. How do we trust the output? How do we know it's the optimum solution? Those are some of the challenges that we're going to face in the future once we start to rely on these things.
I love the open-endedness of this. I think the power of this is really that in the past, as engineers are building software solutions, you really have to think through a workflow that is built on rules. And you can think of that in the current ways that we automate with RPA, for example. With agents, you don't have to predefine all these rules, all these hard-coded static rules that are bounded by what you come up with in terms of the order and the flow of your process. Really, with agents, you're just actually asking a question and you're giving that back to the agent to help make those decisions. It's unbounded in terms of what it can do. It really just relies on you having a good set of tools and being able to guide it to the right processes and endpoints.
Yeah, that's going to introduce a lot of new skills into the environment that we work in. People are going to have to understand how to control the prompts that we give to these agents to manage what they do. And some of the experiments we've worked on with this technology, we're trying to understand how do you put guardrails around specific agents so they sit within the guardrails and they only solve the task they're asked to solve. So there's a new set of skills that we're all having to learn, which is exciting because it's a new technology. We get to learn, we get to continually develop our own experiences and skills, which for me is exciting as well.
Absolutely. For me too. And you hit the nail on the head. Our audience has a good view, hopefully now, of what agentic AI is, what some of the innovation versus governance and regulation questions are out there, and also what the future holds. So David, thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope our audience enjoyed the show.
Thanks for listening to the Synchron State of Tech podcast. Don't forget to like and share this episode, and subscribe to stay up to date on all of the latest and innovative technologies savvy businesses need to know about. To learn more about Synchron, head to our website at www.synchron.com. Stay tuned.